Well, good afternoon, Dr. Joe. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Dr. Dave. How are you doing?
Most excellent, sir. Most excellent. I'd like to welcome our listeners and viewers to another episode of Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We appreciate your attendance. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and today, um, Joe and I, like a lot of people, sometimes we struggle with coming up for topics. And we started thinking, well, what's the first step we need to take in order to come up with a good topic? And then we're like, well, let's talk about taking that first step. So here we are talking about the first step, whether it's a podcast, whether it's getting up for work, whatever. That's what we're going to talk about today, what it takes to
Right.
take that first step. So, Joe, what are your thoughts on first steps or a first step singular?
So, you mentioned it. We sat here and kind of pondered what our topic was going to be today. And then, I started thinking about some of the topics we've already discussed on the show. And one of the topics was goal setting. Another was taking action. And so we think about goal setting and you set out this plan, how you want to get there, but what do you have to do? You have to take that all important first step. That's where it all starts. It's taking that first step, and whether it's to reach a goal, whether it's to get further than you were last week or last year, but it starts with taking that all important first step. So anything we do, and like Dave mentioned, our podcast, we sat here for months pondering, hey, we'd like to do this, but man, we need to do that. And we just kept, and, if you think back to one of our titles, overthinking, that's where we were because we were not able to take that first step. And so we just hovered around this topic for months until we finally said, let's just take the first step. So, you know, sounds easy, or in a lot of cases, most people know that it's not easy, but taking that first step, you realize once you take that first step, it starts to get easier. So, I mean, if you really think about a baby, and they test the waters, they start standing up and leaning on tables and chairs and reaching out and holding things. Then you start noticing they start to take their hands away from the table, and then they take one step, and they continue, and then all of a sudden they're taking 7 or 8 steps. But it started with that, taking that very first step. So I know this sounds, like I said, sounds simple enough, but me and David both experienced it, and again, I know most people have experienced it. So that's where I'm at on our topic today. Is just getting up enough courage and getting up enough gumption to take that important first step. So, what are your thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, Joe, when we talk about first step, the thing that comes to mind to me was the first time I rappelled. That was in the military.
Okay,
And I wasn't a fan of heights. Honestly, I'm still not a fan of
right,
heights, but
right,
there are some things that involve heights that I really enjoy. I enjoy riding in an airplane. I was going to say flying, but I don't actually pilot an aircraft.
right, right,
Riding in an airplane. I actually love rappelling. Not that I've done it a lot. I love zip lining. Not that I've done it a lot. But I go back to that first step. And I was a young guy, my late teens, and I'm surrounded by other people who are scared. Some of them I thought they were just going to run and jump off because they love heights so much, and I'm like, you probably should have a parachute or a mattress down at the bottom. And I'm standing up at the top, and for those of you who are not familiar with rappelling, you have a cliff face, and we'll call it the cliff face. And when you stand, your back is actually to the cliff, to nothing,
right,
and that's scary. It's one thing to walk up to a cliff and look over, like, ooh, that's pretty far
right,
down. It's another thing to say, okay, now turn around and put your back to that
right,
emptiness.
right. Yeah,
And I was petrified. I mean, the fear had overcome me, and I was just like beside myself. Like, not only do I think I can't do this, I know for effing sure I can't do this. There's no way. It's 80 feet down. The people are going to
right,
get hurt.
right. Yeah,
And after about 15, 20 minutes, I think it was that long. It could have only been 3 or 4 minutes because the sergeants were yelling at me so much. I took that first step. And after that, I loved it. I fell in love with it because it's that first step. Once you once you follow the directions or follow that plan, like that goal, rappelling is the goal. The plan is to get down to the bottom. How do you do it? The first step is to step off. It became so easy, and I fell in love with rappelling. And I've only, like I said, I've only done it a few times in my life, but I just really enjoy it.
So Dave, really quick, I don't want to interrupt you, but you just reminded me of, again, I did propelling in the military as well, in the Marine Corps. And again, a 17-year-old kid, and you got these drill instructors screaming at you and telling you, all you got to do is take that first step. And what made it even more terrifying for me, like you said, that 80-foot wall that you're going to rappel down, was you got to see the person in front of you
Yeah.
and how they did it.
Or how
And
they didn't do.
oh, and that was where I was going. So for me, I'm up next, and the guy, the young Marine in front of me, they're screaming at him, take your first step and lean back. He forgot the all important first step and he leaned back.
Oh no.
Oh, so what do you see? You see him upside down now, and you see his feet, kind of kicking in the air, like screaming, hey, what? But it just reminds me that this is very true. Is in that case, he failed to take that first step,
Yeah.
and for him it was chaos. But it was also chaos for us as well, watching that, and then knowing we're going to be in that same situation. So it's just funny and kind of ironic that you talked about, propelling as one, and that's a perfect example of, the importance of taking that first step. Because if you
Yeah.
don't, you're going to be disoriented. You may end up going down your repel station upside down,
Yeah.
flipped around, and totally disoriented. So
Yeah.
I just want to throw that out there because that reminded me of that.
Yeah. And, to kind of build upon that, just because you do something once doesn't mean that you're still not going to have to conquer that issue of taking the first step. And to build upon the rappelling story, I remember when we started, advancing our techniques, it's one thing to go down backwards. You take your first step, you're backwards, you got your hand behind you and your hand in
Yep.
front of you.
Yep.
And, you're just inching your way down, or, rappelling. You're taking nice
Right.
leaps down, and it's cool. But then there's another technique where you go down face forward. So if you go down backwards and you miss your step, you're going to get upside down. You might thump your back. You're going to,
Yep.
you might be standing up straight, holding yourself, screaming because you think,
Right.
you're
Yep.
looking down when you shouldn't. But it's another thing when you go to that cliff and instead of backing up to it, you deliberately just take a step off. It's totally counterintuitive to the human nature to just
Right.
walk off
Yeah.
an 80-foot cliff. I'm just going to do it. I've got this piece of yarn that they call rope, and
Right.
that's all I need.
Right.
And again, that first step, I've done it before, but this was a different way of doing it. And you still have to overcome that fear. And again, once you trust in that process towards achieving that goal and you take that first step, it becomes a lot better. So, just because you've done something once one way or done something several times one way doesn't mean that if you tweak it slightly, that it's going to be just as easy now that you're used to it. It could be you kind of revert back to that part of your brain that's like, this is different and I know it. Even though it's similar, it's still different.
Right.
So yeah, that taking the first step is important.
So
Just like,
Dave,
yeah,
again, I don't want to interrupt you again,
it's
but
all good.
so I want to switch gears a little bit with this, because you made a very good point, or you brought up a very good or important factor that you should consider or think about. So, we talk about our education journey all the time. And I know in one of the podcasts I talked about, starting school 4 times prior to, finally finishing it out. Well, it started with that first step each time. And,
Mhm.
and that was my fear going into it that very last time, was the fact that I had started confident, and within a very short period of time, I lost that. So that was my fear going into it the last time that I finally finished this process. So I'm just curious. Have you experienced something like that where you've tried it? You mentioned, you've done it and been successful. In my case, I did it and was unsuccessful. And so now I had to overcome all those initial
I,
first
I,
steps
I
that
do.
I
I have
did.
another great example,
Okay.
and it is
Okay.
education related. Ironically enough, it's like we've got this little mind thing going.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so in my, I started school a couple of times. I started and took 2 classes, did well, and then stopped. And then a couple of years later, I started and
Right.
actually stuck through my master's program, then took a break and then started again. So not quite the same journey as you, but again, similar. But when I was going to college the second time, which was when I actually started my bachelor's program and stuck with it, um, 2 classes. I might have mentioned this in one of our other podcasts. Math. So in
Right.
school, I
Right.
was not. In high school, I was not a great math student.
Right.
General math, yes. Algebra, not so much at all. Geometry, it did pretty good. Trigonometry, it was A, B, C, D, F. In the first
Right.
5 weeks, that was kind of my answer to math, and that was it. So when I was in my bachelor's program, one of the things you have to take, it's a requirement, is math, of all
Right.
things, of course. Not that not that I'm a mathematician or anything like that, but you have to take it, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I'll take it. What does it involve? Well, it's going to be general math. I'm like, I got it. And they're like, algebra. I'm like, oh, I think I could squeak by that. Some geometry. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty good at that. Trigonometry, algebra 2, pre-calculus. I'm like, wait, what language were you just talking? Because I didn't understand any of the second half of things. Can you
Right.
translate
Right.
that? So I was very fearful of math, and a lot as many people are. So being the diligent student I was, I saved that for the very last courses that I had to
Mm,
take.
okay.
So I'd complete all my coursework, and those were the last two. And I was so afraid of taking math, again, that taking that first step, that I decided to do something different. Instead of taking the math course, I decided I was going to try to test out of it. It's a thing called CLEP testing for college
Right.
credits.
Right.
A lot of
Yep.
folks do it. So I figured, well, that would be a lot less painful to do
Right.
it that way.
Right.
And I can take my time with it. So I bought the math book that the university used, and I went through that thing cover to cover. And I did every quiz and test and everything. I was like, hey, I did pretty well with this. Yeah, I'm confident. And here's my areas I need to study more. So I did that until I got good at that. And I
Right.
went in and I took that test. And I came out and I was just like so defeated and deflated. They said you missed it by 2 points. I was like, oh, I knew it. That just justifies everything I know. I'm not good at math. I missed it, blah, blah, blah. Now I have to take the 2 stupid courses. Now I know how am I going to do with that? I was just kind of like in this self spin, I guess you could say.
Right.
And one of my colleagues saw me as I was walking out afterwards, and they're like, hey, what's going on, Dave? And I was like, took my CLEP test for math. They're like, oh, how'd you do it? I was like, missed it by 2 points. Now I have to take the classes. And they're like, that's really good. And I was like, how is that really good? I missed it by 2 points. Now I have to take the class. And they're like, dude, you just taught yourself college math. You're going to do fine in the class. And they weren't
Right.
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 So when I
Right.
took that
Yep.
additional first step and actually taking the math classes, I did well. And a
Right.
lot of what I learned out of that is a lot of first steps are based in the fear of failure or some
Right.
sort of thing
Yep.
inside of us that's that we want to succeed and we're just afraid that we're going to fail. So yeah, I mean that was a couple of first steps in that one, but it was successful. Not the first time with the testing.
Right.
I was not
Right.
successful with that, but I turned that into a motivation, which we've talked about in previous episodes,
Right.
to
Yep.
succeed. So yeah, I mean, not I still have a little math trauma.
Right. Right. Well, like I said, for me, me starting, stopping 4 times. So for the first time, after high school and in the military, I signed up for a class, didn't even make it to the first week. So I took the first step by signing up for the class.
Right.
Before the class even started, I went back and said, hey, I'm not going to take the class. And then, next time I actually signed up. I think I went to a week of classes and stopped. And then the next time, I think I started a class, went to a couple of classes, so maybe a couple of weeks or a month, dropped out again. And then the fourth time, I actually did take a class and make it through an entire semester.
Wow.
But then that was it. So for me, going back that fifth time, basically, it was, I'd already gone through my first steps many times, multiple times, and was not successful. Like you said, I had not. The one class I did complete completely, but I stopped the program. I never went further. So I did, I guess, have some success with taking that first step because I did complete the class, but I still bowed out afterwards. Um, so I think for me, it was a buildup to finally getting to
Get
that
your
point.
confidence up to a certain point.
Right, right. So I guess you can see the progress that I kept making, even after I took four initial steps or first steps, that fifth step. I think I convinced myself, or I had that now motivation to do this. So I think that was what helped me continue the last time. What was that combination of the motivation and having goals set for myself? Because before that, it was just, let's just take, everybody else is taking a class, I'm going to take a class. And that was literally what it was. I had friends, because each time I was with friends,
Hmm.
and we would, get excited. Hey, let's go to school. Let's go back to school. Let's do this. And so I guess my point and why I'm bringing this up is because initially when I took that first step, and I think we've talked about this before, I hadn't defined my idea of success. So me taking that first step really wasn't my idea of taking the first step. It was, kind of this group think
Hmm.
idea of, taking the first step. And so it really showed when each time I bowed out, because the time that I actually finished the class by myself, it was just me. It was nobody saying, "Hey, let's do this together." It was me. So I think, it shows my progression in taking those first steps, but for the wrong reasons initially. And then, by the fourth time, there was a reason for me to complete it, because I decided, myself, that I was going to take this step. So that was helpful. But then the last time, it was more, I had the goal set, I had the motivation and a reason to do it. So if anything, from my experience, or if I can pass on anybody else, is when you're taking that first step, make sure it's your first step.
Hmm.
It's not because somebody else suggested that you may be good, or that, they think you might be, but it's your first step.
You have
Because
to want it.
yeah, again, just because somebody thinks that you're good at this or suggests, if it's still not within you, that this is your initial step, that you think you're going to achieve it, or you're going to reach that goal, then it's going to be very challenging or difficult for you to complete that task, or for you to follow through, and not just take that first step, but keep going, keep putting one foot in front of the other until you reach your goal. Because it's that empty, um, you know, you're chasing something that you haven't defined as
Right.
important to you. So
And
that would
that
be
ties back into
one.
goal setting and
Right,
having a
right,
plan of action, taking
right.
action.
And so, again, all these things we talk about are really uh, intertwined with one another
Yeah.
to some degree, because a lot of these things, and that's why we're talking about them, they relate to one another.
Yeah.
And so being able to reach back, and like I say, me now understanding what goal setting is, success, my own version or idea of success, motivation, and those things that, motivate me. Again, all those things we've talked about in the past. So yeah, I just, again, for me, if I go back and think, that that's really what it was, that my first steps weren't my first steps. And I
Yeah.
even think with my kids, as we continue to tell them, hey, you're going to college, hey, and my first, my oldest son really struggled because it wasn't his idea of, where he wanted to go. So for his first step, it was not pretty, because it really wasn't what he wanted until a little bit later. Then he
Yeah.
realized it's my first step now. I need to do this.
Right.
And so I think that's very important for us all, thinking about that first step. What
Yeah.
does that first step really mean for us? And
Yeah. And I'd like to kind of change it up a little bit, still stay on topic of course, But let's take this lens and overlay it onto like the workplace or work. And so some of the things I've always thought about, throughout my career when I was applying for a job or a promotion or a position or a lateral or whatever was, wow, should I even bother applying? Because, do I have the experience? Do I have the right personality? Am I going to be the right fit? And many times early in my career, I wouldn't apply for jobs
Right.
because I guess I got myself in my own head too much, which is kind of
Right.
weird because your head is already in your head, right? So, so think about that one for a minute. But so I was telling myself no before I even gave myself a chance to take that first step.
Right.
So my point here is don't be the person to tell yourself no if that decision isn't up to you. So like applying for a job. Your first step is applying for the job.
Right.
Your next
Yep.
first step is passing that interview. Your next first step is getting that job and integrating yourself into that company.
Right.
So if you don't take those first steps of even applying, you're never going to get the next first step or the next
Right.
first step.
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
don't be the one to tell yourself no, employment wise. Let the employer tell you that you're not right for whatever reason.
Right.
So where I'm going with this is early in my career, I stopped myself from doing so many things because I had that fear of failure or uncertainty, or to your point, I didn't have a true goal. So once I defined those things and identified the process and the steps that I need to take, put that plan of action together and started taking action. Well, in order to do that, we got to back up even further. What's that first step? We're right back
Right.
to where we started on the basis of this conversation.
Right.
So taking that first step is very important. I'd like to kind of talk about how do we get that confidence up to take that first step. And honestly, to me, that ties back into motivation.
Right.
The two
Yep.
types of motivation: intrinsic, what do we love to do for the sake of doing it, and the extrinsic, the physical or tangible rewards. And it could be a
Right.
combination of both.
Right.
You have to have enough confidence and motivation within yourself, to your point, not only to take that first step, but to be successful in that first step. So
Yeah. So you said a very important statement there as far as don't be the person that says no. Don't tell yourself no. Don't be the limiting factor. But it all ties to what you said too. The idea that you have to know why you're doing it. You have to have the motivation. You have to have uh, a goal in mind before you apply for a job or try to further your career, because you're going to go into it, and I think I tried to say this before, you're going to go into it with a empty approach, because again, I look at it this way, and I always let people know that if you're thinking about doing something, or if you don't think you can do it, you, and it goes back to one of the topics we talked about, is that regret. Are you going to walk away if you don't try this, or if you don't do this, you don't apply for that job, or are you going to walk away and say, I wish I would have done it, or where could I be if I had done it? So it all goes back to that. Don't be the person inside your head saying you can't do that. If you can walk away, you say, like Dave said, you apply for the job and you don't get it, it's still a success because you took that first step, you applied for it, and you allowed them to tell you no. And in most cases, they're going to come back and say, well, this is why you didn't get the job, or they may say that, they may not, but now you have something you can work on, right? So if they tell you, well, you didn't have the experience, now your next step might be, I need to get that
get that
experience.
experience. Yeah.
So that's what this, and I think you said it before, you can't have any successes if you don't take that first step, because that first step turns into, again, maybe it's a negative, or maybe you didn't get the position, or what you're trying to achieve, but it sets you up for that next level of success, and that next first step because now you go back and get that, say you didn't have the experience, now you get that experience, you go apply for that same job or similar job, and you still don't get it. There may be another next step. Now it may be you don't have the education.
Yeah. Or maybe it's just not the right time,
or not the right
or
fit.
maybe it's not the right fit,
But
and one of the things yeah,
until you take that first step, though, you won't know that,
that's right.
because you may get to the point where you do apply. They tell you need the experience, then the next time they tell you need education, then that takes you back to, and you mentioned it before, is this something I really want to do? Am I really motivated to do this? Is this still going to align with what I want to
Is
do?
it the right company? Is it the right industry?
Right.
Is it the
So
right position?
exactly. So taking that first step may not gain you the success that you're seeking, but it may help you realign to the next first step, because
Yeah.
you may just say, you know what, none of this is really what I want to do, or starting to go down a path that's not what I wanted. So taking that first step can lead you to, and I'll use myself as an example, because initially when I went back to school was just to get my associate's degree. That was my goal at that time. And when I took that first step, that is exactly what I had in mind. But as I started to progress, my first steps turned into other things. It went from earning that associate's, then the bachelor's, then the master's, then the doctorate, but it also started to filter off into other areas, that I was starting to become interested in. And so then I started taking first steps to those things. And then it's just turned into almost like a tree, where all these branches, stemmed from that one initial step or first step. And so that's why it's important that you take that first step, because it gets you to the next step and the next step. And it
I
may
was just
not be
going to
in a
say,
straight
this
line.
first step is going to lead you to the next first step. It's going to lead you to the
Exactly.
next first step.
Right. And like I said, it may not go in a straight line. It may veer off. You may start branching
Like
off into
sidestep,
other
it's like a
things.
dance.
Right. You're
Step
doing a
forward, step
cha-cha
to
or
the side,
something.
step to the side, step
Right.
forward.
But that's the important thing, is taking that first step. And me and me and Dave both can attest to the fact that you take that first step, and you get to the point, kind of like us, we've had our long journey, so we've taken a lot of steps, we've taken a long scenic route, and we've accumulated a
We
lot of
stepped a
steps.
marathon.
Right, we've stepped a marathon, but we've taken a lot of first steps. And are we where we want to be? Have we taken our final step? Absolutely not. Have we taken our final first step? No, absolutely not. Us sitting here, talking to you on this podcast, or you watching or listening to this, that was a first step.
Yeah.
And then where does this next first step take us? So
Our next episode is going to be another first step.
exactly. So it just, taking that initial first step, you'll sit back, and that's what I've been reflecting on, is just that initial first step turned into a step this way, into a step this way, and then it realigned and it went that way. And like I said, I really compare it to a tree. It starts up one path or one growth, and then all of a sudden you start to see branches all over the place.
And those
And
branches are
absolutely
opportunities to take other first steps.
Exactly. So that's why, this topic we thought was very important, that you really embrace whatever your first step is, because it's going to lead to the next step and then the next step. But you have to take that first step to achieve your goals, to have the success that you want, to figure out how you're going to get there. You have to take that first step. And again, it may take you to the unknown, but then that's another first step.
Yeah.
So the all important first step, taking that first step.
Yeah.
So,
all right, let's go ahead and wrap this episode up. Any final words?
like I said, it's a lot of cases, or a lot of times it's just baby steps, but it's a first step.
Yeah.
Again, it may not be a full stride, but it's, maybe just reaching out, like that kid is starting to release from that table or whatever support they're using, and trying it. that foot out for the first time, and that's what it is. Sometimes it is just, half a step, but a step is a step.
A
So
step is a
taking that
step.
initial first step. So
Yeah.
that's where I'll leave it. What do you got, Dave?
I'm going to second what you just said. I couldn't have said it better myself. Each first step leads to the next first step, and those first steps lead to more first steps and opportunities. So, you know, that's all you can do is take that first step. It's stepping backwards is still a step, not that we recommend it, but stepping forward is the ideal thing to try to do. And, just one foot in front of the other, take it, year by year, month by month, week by week, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, if you have to, but just keep stepping forward, taking those first steps.
Yep.
With that, thank you, listeners and viewers, for watching another episode of Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. Yep, we're just human. And until next time, keep on being your not so ordinary you.